Hello and welcome to the Prison to Promise Be Free Indeed, which is part of the Trish TV show. But what's important is that our theme is about resilient faith. And so if you saw the promo and you saw about toxic faith, toxic churches, spiritual abuse, I'm not out to bash up the church. What I am about is healing, reconciling people back to the Lord, to have that healthy faith, and to encourage us as a church to examine our ways rather than preserve our opinions so that we can do better. There's a whole lot of people out there who are not in church because they have been hurt, and then they're kind of getting blamed for having a bad attitude, which is a little shallow because a pastor pastors and we bring healing. Jesus said to go after the lost sheep, go after the one. And it might not feel like fun. It might feel like frustrating and hard work. But if you go after the one, you're going to have to deal with the tough stuff. And some of it's a bit icky. We don't like to talk about this stuff, but I came across my guest, Remy Diederich. He's F. Remy Diederich, to distinguish him from a couple of other people online. When you're looking for him, I came across his book, Broken Trust. I read it, every word. I didn't leave. I just read it. Some books you don't. And I contacted him and said, we need to talk, and I need to have you on my show because there's a lot of people who need your help. So please welcome Pastor Remy Diederich.
Hey, Trish. Good to be here.
Oh, it's so good to talk to you again. And it's just, I love the way you've written a number of books.
Yeah.
The one, and I would recommend all of them. I've read more than one. I've read, I think, 3 or 4. The one that got my attention is Broken Trust. Mm-hmm. And you share your story in that very vulnerably. There's a lot of pastors write a lot of Christian self-help books, and they usually only include, sometimes they'll include the stories where they've failed, but quite often it's a little bit of self-congratulations in there and look how good I am. I'm not bagging them, but I was struck by your honest vulnerability and your journey through that church that turned out to be, let's just say, a little off with the teaching. Sure. And you explore the topic of the difference between a cult and a church, because we often associate abuse with cults. So, Remy, if you could just give us an overview of what spiritual abuse is, where it might be found, and a little bit about what you do, and then we'll go back to a little bit of your story. If you could do that, that'd be great.
Well, I often distinguish toxic faith from spiritual abuse. Toxic faith, people are probably more accustomed to talking about legalism. So when I talk about toxic faith, I'm talking about being legalistic, meaning that your relationship with God, or what you're telling other people about God, is based on rules and how to follow rules. So that's right, the legal aspect. And that's toxic. It's toxic because it doesn't actually bring you in relationship with God. It just weighs you down. Jesus talked about a heavy yoke. And that's what a toxic faith is.
Right there, you've got my attention right there, because I actually hadn't seen, I know legalism is unhealthy, but I hadn't actually seen it as, and it is toxic. It's exactly what Jesus said. So
right.
Thank you for that right there.
So that's, I always think in metaphors or visual, but I think of toxic faith as like the ground that spiritual abuse grows out of. So spiritual abuse is when you take a legalistic system and then you use that against people, trying to make them, you can manipulate them, trying to have power over them. You're trying to use that toxic faith, that legalistic faith, to your advantage. You're trying to get something out of someone else through that. And it's a violation of those people. So I think you can have a toxic faith, probably without spiritual abuse, but they pretty much almost always leads to the other.
Yeah, that's, and look, you also talk in the book. You talk about the difference between a cult and a church that's legalistic, that they can both be damaging. I want to speak to the difference there, but also I want to visit the difference between, you just said about, people who do it for their own agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And there are two kinds of leaders really who do that. There's the ones who consciously do it for their own selfish needs.
Right.
But then it's quite likely there are more of them who sincerely believe in the vision, the
Mm-hmm.
goal, and what they're trying to do, and don't really realize that they could be bullying in their way of doing things. So let's look at what is the difference between a cult and a church that is a little off.
Well, I think a cult is something that's going to take you away from Jesus.
Right.
A church that might be a little off might still have Jesus at the center, but the way they're proclaiming the message is heavy-handed. And I think, what you were saying second there, I think it's very common. I know I'm guilty of what you were talking about, especially when I was a young pastor. And I think I always have to check myself that I'm not going there. But it's when you're passionate about something, you want everyone to do that. I remember my dad said that when he quit smoking, you don't want to be friends with a person who just quit smoking because they're just going to go around and they want to get everyone to not smoke anymore. And I think that when you come to faith, that's often what you do with your faith. You just want everyone to do it the way you did it. And because you know how it worked for you, it's got to work for them. And you're doing it with a great sincerity and passion and love for Jesus, but it's coming across heavy-handed. I remember this was years ago, but I wrote a pamphlet on how to know the will of God. And I shared it with one of the elders in our church because I wanted to get his feedback. And he said, well, Remy, it was really good, but you use the word must a lot. Like you must do this. And if you want to know God's will, you must do that. And you must do that. And he said, I just don't think you should sit. That's very heavy-handed way to approach it. And I really did at the time, 30 years ago, I really disagreed with him. I go, no, but it's true. You must do those things. And so I look back and I go, I was a toxic pastor at the time and I didn't know it. I didn't do it I wasn't trying to hurt people. I was trying to do just the opposite. So yeah, I agree with you that it's very easy to be in that situation where out of a love for Jesus and a love for people, you were actually being legalistic and toxic, and it's too bad.
Wow. I just need to park there and sit in that because I want to. If you're watching, you may be watching live or you may be watching the recording and you're a pastor or a leader. I've been that way too, in that, I'm a very passionate person. I'm very zealous. And in the personality tests, there's if you know the DISC, it's the high I, which is the passionate person, and then the high D, which is really the bossy leader kind of thing.
Right.
And often we are charismatic and passionate, and that's what draws people.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a difference between pointing people to Jesus and pointing to people to your way to see Jesus.
Exactly.
And I love your beautiful humility.
Mm-hmm.
That if we can have that humility to say, am I serving best? Is this the best way to get it across?
Yeah, you don't want people to be doing it your way to please you. You want it to be doing it God's way to please him. And it's a very fine line, but I think if we can be honest as pastors, if you're a pastor or really anybody, any Christian, if you could be honest with yourself and go, why am I approaching it this way? Something I learned, I think it was a process for me. I taught in a addiction treatment center for years, just on the side. I've been a pastor for years, but I was on the side. I would go in and teach in the addiction treatment center. And I ended up teaching a lot about shame. In fact, my first book I wrote, Healing the Hurts of Your Past, it's about overcoming shame. But wow. I learned so much about myself that I was raised. So I did a lot of research on shame, both in the Bible and in secular books as well. And I realized that I was a shame-based person, and that I was motivated by trying to please people and trying to be legalistic. When I always call myself just I was the best Pharisee when I first came to faith because I wanted to do everything just the right way to please God and to please other people. So people would pat me on the back and go, wow, you're a really good Christian. And so I'm just very aware of that. But shame is something that can drive us into this legalistic, toxic kind of mentality.
Wow. And just clarify it for us, the difference between shame and guilt that we should feel if we've done the wrong thing. So
yeah, I mean, that's a very good distinction. And I talk about good shame and bad shame. And other people do as well. I like to, when I use the word shame, I typically just try to keep it to bad shame just to avoid the confusion. But I think there's the appropriate kind of feeling bad for what you did, feeling like I did something wrong. I mean, that's your conscience saying that's wrong. Don't do that again. That's not profitable. But then there's that feeling like I'm a bad person. Not only did I do something bad, I'm bad, right? So it's a distinction between your actions and your total self-concept, your total self-identity. And so I think a lot of people are living out of this self-identity of being not good enough. And because I'm not good enough, I'm ashamed of who I am. And so now I have to perform for everybody, including God, before I can be accepted. And so what I've learned out of that, writing that book and teaching those classes, I learned really to speak in a way to let people know that, hey, you're not here to please me. So often in my sermons in my church, I would just let them know, like, hey, this is what I think the Bible says, and I've lived this way, and I'm excited about this. But you know what? This isn't between you and me. When you get to heaven, you're not going to have to answer to me. You're going to have to answer to God. So you need to let the Holy Spirit speak to you. So, if you don't want to do what I'm preaching today, you know what? That's okay. I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to accept you. You can still be a part of this church. But you have to bring these things to Jesus and ask him what he thinks. And, especially when you talk about money, same way, this is what we're doing. I had a couple capital campaigns. We built a building, and it was like, I'm excited. This is what we're doing. This is a great opportunity for you. But you know what? If you don't want to be a part of this, that's okay. You can still be a part of the church. We'll still love you. And people just would always comment back to me, thank you. I've been in so many churches where people were just pounding on me that I had to do it a certain way. And just thank you for giving me the freedom to not engage if I don't want to. And then surprisingly, that made people want to engage more. Once they knew that they were free, then they were more apt to jump in.
It's so true. When you're desperate for something, it's repellent. People just feel too, chased after and controlled. Yeah. Like when you're desperate for love and you'll chase people.
Exactly.
And I think that's what can happen in church. And I think during the pandemic, when churches were instructed to lock down, they all reacted differently, and very much I could see, as we looked online, there was very much, and this is before there was, I'm not talking about the vaccine and the anti-vaxxing and all that sort of stuff. Like before that, there was this attitude of, you can't tell us what to do. We will meet regardless, and we will pray the blood of Jesus will protect us from this virus. And, but, Jesus can protect you from the virus, but he can't protect you from an arrogant attitude of rebellion and defiance. It's the where it comes from, it opens it up. And I wondered at the time, I thought, how much of this is not so much about the congregation and caring for them, it's about the control of the people that you're the boss of your building, and getting focused on the organization as the church rather than the people. And what would happen if you have the fear-based motivation, if they don't come for a few weeks, maybe they'll drift away. When there was so much online that actually fed people, and I think it actually challenged their faith, and they actually went deeper into the Lord.
Yeah, and I think it's too bad, because so often pastors will, again, they have to be willing to admit, I'm afraid that people are going to leave. I'm afraid if I'm not in their life every week, they're going to not, their commitment is so shallow that if they're not here every week, they're going to fall away. And that's really fear-based. And it's just like, are you trusting in God? Or are you trusting in their ability to like you as a pastor? And I think, again, if you can just cast your predicament upon the water kind of thing, just say, hey, this is God's church, and I don't have to force you to do anything. It's just that's what grace is all about. It's suddenly you change the culture in your church from being legalistic and toxic to being free, and people, the smiles are natural and not forced, and people want to be there because there's this sense of freedom in the air.
I love that. I love that. And if you're watching, what do you think? Do you have any comments or questions for Pastor Remy? This is so real and such heart stuff, and I love look, I'm a pastor's kid. I'm not against church or against pastors, but I want to empower people and leaders to relax into what God is doing. And that's why I loved what you wrote about it. And it's so sad that people have been sometimes it's intentional because it's to do with control and whatever. But I think the majority of the pain caused is unintentional. I know that the last season that happened, that was, we go through different seasons where we're going through pain. But the last time that happened to me, I know very well that the people that hurt me didn't believe they were doing that. They genuinely believed that they were right, and that their actions that went with that, the lies which were kind of like little bit of gaslighting there, maybe a bit, but justifying and reframing things. And it was only when I went to prayer to say, Lord, show me how you see this, that I was able to keep forgiving.
Sure.
It's very hard when, and I'm not justifying people. Like if you're watching and you've been jealous, I don't want people getting triggered by this conversation, and it can happen, and I don't want it to be like, but God is not afraid of your pain, of how it reflects on his church. He just wants your heart. And that's what I loved about what you wrote, and in several of the other books. Remy, talk to us about your experience on the other side of the pulpit as a member of a congregation.
Yeah. Well, I came to faith in college, and I was a part of a large charismatic church here in the Midwest in the United States. And it was very exciting. As I look back on it, it was probably pretty legalistic. But, I think when you're a new Christian, you can absorb legalism a little bit better, because at least I was very hungry to know what to do. Again, I think probably out of my shame-based upbringing, I wanted to know the things that would make people happy and God happy. So that was I didn't see it as toxic at the time. Looking back, I can see some of those things were legalistic and /toxic now. But then I got into a church plant. It was a small church, and that's where I really cut my teeth in pastoring. I was an associate pastor, just part-time. But over time, the senior pastor, he became very paranoid. In fact, he had a vision one time when he felt that, and he had a vision of the church building, and anyone who left the building, a storm hit, and the storm, killed those people. So the implication was that you needed to stay inside the church, otherwise, God was going to get you, kind of thing. And I talked to him about that. I said, this is really unhealthy. I mean, you just can't say things like that. I mean, if that's just too divisive, and it sounds very controlling, and that sounded cultish. And he said, well, Remy, you can either agree with me or leave, but that's just the way it is. And I knew this guy for years, and I was just really astounded, but he increasingly up to that point had been getting more and more paranoid. And I said, okay, I mean, if that's the choice you're giving me, then I have to leave. And I was surprised. It was pretty devastating to me. I look back at that time now, and I didn't know anything about spiritual abuse. I didn't even know the term at the time, and I probably thought it was an aberration. It was probably this wasn't happening to anybody any place else. And it really sent me into a tailspin for about 5 years. I left the church. I didn't leave Jesus, but I left the church just because it was so disorienting to me that my church experiences weren't working out. And then finally, I just thought, well, Jesus loves the church. No one's perfect, so I didn't go back to that church, but I started with another church, and that's when I got back into the church and eventually into ministry. And then I started a church about 20 years ago and had a chance to create the grace-based church that I had been looking for.
Oh, I love that you've had the experience on both sides, mm-hmm. because it just brings a depth to what you're saying and an empathy to people. And mm-hmm. I know there's different cultures, and people are, they call it the woke movement, where people are reacting to, established norms, and it's almost like our conservative reaction against it, that everything that it's bad, and even to mock it. But there's actually people that, the woke being a waking up to. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that there's been a season of teaching on unconditional obedience as biblical. Mm-hmm. And that has corresponded particularly with the control of women, that sense of authority. Mm-hmm. And listening to the podcast about Mars Hill, that right. I think you mentioned in one of your blogs, which was the what was it called, the which I do recommend that people listen to. Don't tell your people not to listen to stuff because it might make them start getting critical. No, mm-hmm. you want to have spiritually critical thinking, because passion can turn into control, like we said earlier. Mm-hmm. And it is important. It's healthy and important that instead of being afraid of deconstructing faith, because if you only deconstruct, you're going to walk away from your faith. But Jesus is real, God is real, but not necessarily all the baggage that goes with it. So talk to us about this current theme in society about deconstructing faith, because there's a second step to it that you mm-hmm. talk about in a recent blog.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think deconstructing faith, I think it's, if you did a Google search right now, I think it would rate pretty high on the list of terms that are out there. People are talking about it all the time. And deconstructing faith, because people are leaving church. They're starting to look at it and say, wait a minute, these rules that they have grown up with, they've been going to church out of obligation. They've been told to do things just because that's what you do. That's what you're supposed to do. Don't ask me, just do it kind of attitude. And now in our age, people are saying, wait a minute, I don't have to just do something that I don't want to do. So they're leaving church, and not only leaving church, but they are leaving Jesus. Like I said, I left church, but I didn't leave Jesus. So a lot of people are leaving church and Jesus and their faith, and they're just pulling it apart. But as I wrote in my blog piece, I just said, deconstruction is actually a good thing, because oftentimes when we build, whether it's build a building or whatever it might be, we put in material that wasn't the best. Maybe it was cheap at the moment, and so we bought some of that, or it was the only thing available. And it's the kind of way it is with our faith. Sometimes, I came into a church, I made good things about it, but there were some bad things about it. And so I needed to deconstruct that faith that I got as a new Christian. I needed to unravel it, take out the pieces that were toxic and legalistic, and then build it back up again. So that's the reconstructing of faith. So I think deconstructing faith is a good thing. So I like to talk about it because everyone seems to be talking about it right now, but I'd like to add the element of it's kind of the whole old concept of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Just because you don't like the way it is, it doesn't mean you reject the whole thing. And I think that's true with the whole topic of spiritual abuse. And I think that's something that I remember when you were first looking for someone to interview, you were saying, I want to talk to someone who isn't anti-church. And right. Then you came across me, but I don't want, I want to help people see what's defective. I want them to see the bad material that we put into our faith and in our churches, and then take that out and build up a faith and a church and churches that are full of grace. So that's my hope. There's a lot of people. One of the things I don't like about the discussion of spiritual abuse is that it's kind of like I was talking to a friend who was divorced, and I said, I hope, now that you're divorced, you don't want to go around and talk about your divorce all the time. You don't want to talk about how bad your wife was or how bad other, spouses are. I mean, hopefully you'll move through that pain and come out of it and talk about how can I create a good marriage. And it's the same way with the church. You don't want to just walk away and be mad all the time and kibitz with other people about how bad churches are, and I'm so glad I left and I'm never going back. No, what you want to do is come out of that and say, let's learn from this and let's come at this again and create a better church.
I love it. I love that. That's just so helpful. And we have your website scrolling across the bottom of the page, and I want to show it to people now. So it is readingremy.com, and we have you've got your blog there, your book Broken Trust. They can get it on Amazon, or I would suggest you come to Remy's website and explore and have a look around there. I've just opened up a tab, Broken Trust, a practical guide for survivors of spiritual abuse. And it's a really good book. It is very helpful. And then there's healing in it, and you won't feel to be made to feel guilty or condemned. So when so many books about pain are about, you start repenting first. It's like, no, it's just very real. The other place I'd like to direct you all to is Remy's YouTube channel, which is here, f.Remy Diederich. And you've got there it is there, the spelling. I will put these links in the description afterwards. But I invite you, I have already subscribed, as you can see, and it's very, very good. And he's got some videos here, like, let's have a look at this. We've got how to overcome the problems that weigh you down, but should you leave a church after a spiritually abusive experience? And these are nice short videos. You've got toxic leaders, toxic pastors, and spiritual abuse. Have a look through those. You'll find some answers. And Remy, they can get in touch with you, can't they? Will they get in touch with you through your website?
Yeah, through your website. And I've got a Facebook page, all the normal means, whether it's Twitter or Instagram or whatever. I'm happy to correspond with people. And if you sign up for the blog, if you subscribe, I'll send you one of the chapters from my book, Broken Trust, as well.
Oh, that's brilliant. Remy, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you.
Yeah.
There's some great nuggets there. And, once again, this is the purpose of this podcast video podcast was to equip you to have the confidence to self-examine. Because some people, they're more interested in being right than getting it right. And we have to have the humility to go, hang on a minute, could I be, I thought I was wrong once, but then I found out I was mistaken. But, to have that tenderness, because it is about Jesus. It's not about us. And God actually loves the people more than you do. So he will do whatever it takes. We don't have to help the Holy Spirit by manipulating, guilting, bullying, and whatever it is that we don't think we think we're just being strong and decisive and directional. But God's got this. So self-examination, but also that there's healing for you. And you might be a pastor who's been in both positions where you've been hurt, and there's healing. You don't have to become bitter and crusty and so on. You can be free. And this show is called Be Free Indeed. I want the indeed. I don't just want to be free. I want to be free indeed. Don't you? Well, Remy Diederich has got books that will help with that. So I want to encourage you to visit his website, pick up his books, and just do some inventory in your spiritual life with God. You can trust him to do that with you. You can trust him. Well, God bless you. Pastor Remy, it's been an absolute pleasure. I just feel like I've been sitting at the feet of wisdom. So thank you so much. And may your ministry grow far and wide, because you're bringing healing after a particularly difficult couple of years for the church. So well done. Thank you so much for your service to the church.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Wonderful. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next time. Oh, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.